Now he was teaching in one of the synagogues on the Sabbath, and behold, there was a woman who had a spirit of infirmity 18 years, and was bent over, and could in no way raise herself up. But when Jesus saw her, he called her to him, and said to her, Woman, you are loosed from your infirmity. And he laid his hands on her, and immediately she was made straight, and glorified God. But the ruler of the synagogue answered with indignation, because Jesus had healed on the Sabbath. And he said to the crowd, There are 6 days in which men ought to work. Therefore come and be healed on them, and not on the Sabbath. The Lord then answered him and said, Hypocrite, does not each one of you on the Sabbath loose his ox or donkey from the stall, and lead it away to water it? So ought not this woman, being a daughter of Abraham, whom Satan has bound for 18 years, be loosed from this bond on the Sabbath? And when he had said these things, all his adversaries were put to shame, and all the multitude rejoiced for all the glorious things that were done by him. Then he said, What is the kingdom of God like? And to what shall I compare it? It's like a mustard seed which a man took and put in his garden, and it grew, and it became a large tree, and the birds of the air nested in its branches. And again he said, To what shall I liken the kingdom of God? It is like leaven, which a woman took and hid in 3 measures of meal, till it was all leavened. My name's Arthur, and I thank you for joining me as we share together these verses from Luke chapter 13, and we've read verses 10 to 21. We noted earlier that Jesus did most of his teaching in the synagogues. He progressively went from synagogue to synagogue. There were other occasions out in the wilderness where he gathered large crowds, but when he came to the people, it was in the synagogues on the Sabbath. And it was natural for Jesus, when he saw someone in a predicament, to automatically want to help that person. And so when he sees this woman who has been bent over for 18 years with a spirit of infirmity, and was no longer able to lift herself up, he called her to himself, and said to her, Woman, you are loosed from your infirmity. There's no discussion here about her having faith, but she did respond to the call. The lack of empathy by the ruler of the synagogue suggests she was not regularly at this synagogue, so she had come because Jesus was there. And when Jesus calls her to himself, she comes to him. That was all the faith she needed, because it's always God's will to do good to people. Good gifts come from him. So it says he laid his hands on her, and immediately she was made straight and glorified God. Maybe she didn't dare ask for healing in case she'd be disappointed, but the Lord reached out to her. But not everybody has this attitude of wanting to help. And because the people were divided about Jesus, there were some who would find fault in what he did. And in this particular synagogue, the ruler of the synagogue got indignant because Jesus had healed on the Sabbath. He doesn't criticize Jesus directly, but he says to the crowd, There are 6 days on which men ought to work. Therefore come and be healed on them, and not on the Sabbath. Maybe there were extra people in the synagogue that day because they heard Jesus was there. And here he was, faithfully keeping the doors open and nobody coming. And suddenly Jesus turns up and a crowd turns up, and he accuses the crowd of coming to be healed. But surely that's where we should come to God, to be healed. Maybe there was a reason the crowd were not so regular at this synagogue. The ruler says, Don't come here to be healed on the Sabbath day. He's accusing them of self-interest. But Jesus had come to the synagogue, and if there were extra people there that day, it was because they'd come to see Jesus, not because not because they all wanted to be healed. And Jesus defends his healing, calling the person a hypocrite, a person who wears a mask, who pretends to be righteous when he is not. Each one of you, on the Sabbath, if your ox or your donkey is in the stall, you will lead it away to water it. You don't make it suffer all day without water just because it is the Sabbath. So ought not this woman, being a daughter of Abraham, whom Satan has bound, think of it, for 18 years, be loosed from this bond on the Sabbath? The point here is that she has been bound and she needs to be freed, and that freedom needs to be given for every day, including the Sabbath. Jesus did his miracles on every day, including the Sabbath. He didn't stop doing those on the Sabbath because he was not gaining an income. It was not regular work like harvesting your crop or building a road where a person is paid for their labours. It was a gift from God, a gracious act of God. So it was not work. Now when he said these things, those who opposed him had no answer, but the people who had gathered to hear him rejoiced. Now, this raises the question, though, why does a company of God's people, in this case the synagogue, seem to have somebody in charge who is against God, at least against the Son of God? And so Jesus says, what is the kingdom of God like? To what shall I compare it? It's like a mustard seed, which a man took and put in his garden, and it grew and became a large tree, and the birds of the air nested in its branches. So the mustard seed is a small seed and normally a small bush, but this one grew into a large bush. The company of God's people on earth began as a very small company, but now has grown to a very large company in almost every part of the earth. But when it becomes a large tree, then the birds of the air come and nest in its branches. We saw in the parable of the sower that the birds of the air represent Satan. The birds are not part of the tree, but they take up residence in the tree. And so it is that they take advantage of the tree. They are often hidden in the foliage of a tree, so you may not see them, but they are there. And often they are destructive of the tree, tearing at its fruit, tearing at its branches. The birds exploiting the tree rather than being part of the tree. So the company of God's people is a prime target for Satan to infiltrate with people who will take advantage of the social aspects of the church, but not be part, really, in spirit with the church. But they can disguise themselves pretty well in the church and take advantage, and often interfering with the fruit of the church. And another parable, to what shall I liken the kingdom of God? It is like leaven, which a woman took and hid in 3 measures of meal, till it was all leavened. This leaven is yeast. To make soft bread, you take the flour, make the dough, and then add some yeast until the bread puffs up. And then, at the right time, you bake it. You destroy the yeast, but the bread is improved. You don't let it proceed to the point where the whole thing is rotten. And so God allows evil in our lives and in the community of the church for the benefit of the church, to make us soft, as it were, not hard. Some religious people are very hard, but the experience of life and the difficulties of life help to make us soft, to be able to sympathize with those in trouble. It is not there to destroy us, and the leaven does not destroy the bread, because the process is interrupted before that stage arrives. Pride puffs up, and so in various times in history the church has become very proud and very puffed up. When the bread is baked, the leaven is destroyed. Again, a picture of the church with evil in it, but there is a purpose for the evil doctrine. Evil doctrine produces pride and feeds off the true. God allows this so that the bread might be soft and not hard.